Raw. Today's guest is David Scheinbaum. David is a photographer and gallerist and the former director of the Marion Center for Photography, among other things. I'm your host, Ann Kelly. Thanks for joining us today, David.
No, it's a pleasure, Ann. It's good to see you.
You too.
I'll say right off the bat, I'm not used to talking to people very much lately, so it's nice to see a face and to talk.
It is, definitely. Where are you today, David?
I'm sitting at my desk in Janet's in my studio, which it also functions as Scheinbaum and Russick, and it also functions as where our dark room is, and I have this incredibly messy desk, which you cannot see, and I'm probably, that's a good thing. And yeah, it's great. I didn't have to clean up anything, and I didn't have to get dressed, so I'm totally comfortable.
That's the good thing about Zoom. You just get the space behind you looking how you want it, and then you're good to go. Or you use a crazy Zoom background. But some of those,
I've seen a few of those too. But then people disappear when they back up into them or something.
Start looking a little bit surreal, I gotta say.
Right. Well, this is a real background.
Yes, mine too.
That's a real light box.
So David and I met, I think it was 1998. I was one of his students at the College of, what was then the College of Santa Fe.
Yeah.
And you were the head of the department. And that was actually why I moved to New Mexico at all. I really got into photography in Denver, and I heard about this new exciting, the college had a photo program before that, but this whole building was being constructed with brand new dark rooms, and you were.
Is that why you came? That's how you came to Santa Fe? Wow.
It is, yes. So my first semester, the classes were still in the Army barracks, and they were completing the construction. So I got to walk around and watch it being built. And then you brought in the whole Beaumont Newhall library.
Yeah.
Which was an amazing resource that we had there.
Yeah.
So you worked for Beaumont.
Yeah, I guess you'd say I was Beaumont's assistant. Mm-hmm. I see. You came to New Mexico for the College of Santa Fe, so I came to New Mexico for Beaumont Newhall. Growing up and always kind of having a very early interest in photography, Beaumont was kind of my hero, as other kids might have liked, Mickey Mantle in baseball, or someone in sports, or someone in art, I don't know. But Beaumont was really someone who I read every word. At the time, I had read every word he written. And it really was after I went to a lecture he gave at the Metropolitan Museum of Art on the occasion of Paul Strand exhibit. And actually it was Paul Strand and he speaking. And it was after actually seeing him and hearing him speak that I decided I wanted to move here and see if I could work with him, which was a total fantasy. And in a way, it's a good lesson for maybe some of your viewers, because, I moved here with a dream and it happened.
You were in New York before that.
I was in Brooklyn. I was in New York. I was teaching at 2 universities. I was teaching at 2 colleges, basically. I started teaching college really young. I was very lucky. I don't know that this could be done now, but my last year of college, I was teaching at a community college and another university, a place called LaGuardia Community College and Pace University. And I actually started teaching college my last year of college. I did have a lot of photographic practical experience, but not so much formal education. So, but I graduated, I worked on Madison Avenue, I taught, but I kind of gave all that up and moved to New Mexico with the hope of meeting Beaumont and with the fantasy of working with him. And it took me a few months after moving here where I kind of got up the nerve to call him. I was really nervous about calling him. And I remember I had written out like a couple of scripts on a pad, you know, like what I was going to say. And like, I don't know, I just like put myself through this really anxiety moment. And so I called him up, and for some reason I didn't expect him to answer the phone. I don't know, but so as soon as like he got on the phone, and I froze, and then I started stuttering like I am now. I thought, oh, Mr. Newhall. I didn't know what to call him, like Mr. Newhall, Professor Newhall. So I just started stumbling, and he totally interrupted me, and he said, "Do you want to come out and meet me?" I said, "Yes." And he goes, "When do you want to come?" And I didn't have, and he goes, "How about this afternoon?"
Wow.
And he gave me directions to his house, and we met, and that was kind of the beginning of probably close to 15 years of working with him. And I'm still every day basically not just thinking about him, but pretty much every day I'm still learning from the time and the years I spent with him. The last maybe 6 years of his life, he wasn't in perfect physical health. So I also traveled with him. So for 6 years, almost once a month, that was his rule. He only would travel once a month. He was always asked to speak at places, and he would have traveled a lot more, but pretty much for many years, once a month, we would go on these like 4-day trips somewhere where if he was lecturing on Friday, we would go on Wednesday, and we would come back on Sunday. And that gave us a lot of time. And it was really those trips and those dinners and the meals and the hotels and the airports, and that it was kind of amazing. It was an amazing time for me. And as I said, it has a lot to do with the rest, with my life. I was going to say the rest of my life, which is true. It affects my life every day. And now, as the executor of his estate, I would, again, almost every day I have a request or something that I have to address. So yeah, those were amazing years.
Can you imagine if you hadn't made that phone call?
Well, that's what I was, I guess, leading at when I said, if your viewers, the lesson here is, first of all, everyone could be accessible. You just, for some people, you might have to, if we could talk about hip hop later, I'll tell you, that it's probably the least accessible group of people. But in terms of artists, and especially scholars, and especially people who are teachers and who really care about the next generation, not only is everyone accessible, but, I think everyone, as probably you and I have already, have or feel a responsibility of wanting to give back and wanting to share with the up and coming people. I'm sure at Photo Eye you have interns or assistants, and I guessing, but knowing you the way I do, I'm sure you've taken a few people under your wing already, and they're probably already left you and entered the world. And so Beaumont's generation, our generation, it's very much a part of the process. So again, if people are watching this, people shouldn't hesitate. If there's someone out there who inspires you, who you feel has someone to offer you in your life, in your work, in whatever endeavor you're practicing, you should try to seek them out. And I would say that in my experience, the people I encourage to do that, often it comes true. They get to be with those people, and that's where a different kind of learning takes place. That's where life happens. And I think, more and more, especially in these days, people should be taking advantage of that.
Well, and there's all of these new ways to reach out to people anymore.
That's true.
Maybe if it had been 2020 when you were reaching out to Beaumont, you might have DM'd him through Instagram, or
It might
who
have,
knows?
and it would have been maybe one of a 1,000 he'd get a day, and who knows? I mean, Beaumont made it Beaumont responded to everybody. He answered every phone call. He answered every letter. He was, I try daily, people who know me make fun of me. I wake up, most days saying like, today I'm going to be like Beaumont. And like by my second phone call, it's like, I don't want to answer the phone. It's like, I'm not answering it. Beaumont was so generous and so giving. It's kind of was amazing. And I watched him for all those years. Literally, he never turned anyone away, and he didn't respond. And unfortunately, I have to say, as much as I aspire to that, I kind of probably do it too often. So anyway,
Well,
I said yes to you.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. We ran into each other at Visions, which is a great local lab. And of course, we've known each other for years, but I'd actually been thinking about calling you, David, and then I just ran into you. So it was kind of perfect.
Well, that's kind of a Santa Fe thing, right?
It is. It is very Santa Fe.
You just have to think about the person, and you run into it. Even with COVID, it still happens.
Yeah. So one of the memorable classes I took with you was fine print, and that was just an amazing experience. Are you still shooting all film? I know you've been making some cameraless work recently. Do you shoot digital for anything?
I shoot digital for color. If we talk about the hip hop work later, all the color work, and that's a little bit of a lie, but 95% of the color work is digital. And then if we talk, I've been working in India the last 5 years, I guess, 4 or 5 years. The first trip I shot just all black and white. Second trip, I shot black and white and color film. And then the trips after that, all the color, I've shot digital. So if I shoot color, it's digital, but I'm still shooting black and white. I'm still in the darkroom. I'm still printing. I try 5 days a week, but I'm in the darkroom 4 days a week now, at least 4 days a week since March, since quarantine. So I'm in the darkroom a lot. And it's not only doing cameraless stuff, but mostly.
Well, and it's helpful that you have your gallery and your home and your darkroom all in the same place. I'm sure that's been definitely helpful during quarantine.
It kind of was Janet's and my way. We started this way. Both of us being photographers. Of course, we always had our darkroom in our house. And when we started Scheinbaum and Rustick, we started that in our living room of our house. And then we ended up moving out of that house to another house down the street with our family. And we turned that whole house into Scheinbaum and Rustick gallery, as well. It was still our darkroom and our workspace. And then when we went public, we had a space, on Guadalupe Street. I don't know if you were here for that, but we had a public space for quite a number of years. But actually, we closed the space probably right when you came, because when we received the funding from John and Ann Marion to build the Marion Center for Photographic Arts, I had to make a decision. All those previous years, I was teaching at the college, but basically, I was teaching Mondays and Wednesdays. And so I would go there 2 full days a week, and that was it. And the rest of the days I would be at Scheinbaum and Rustick, and Janet and I was starting our business and doing all that. But when the funding came to build this photo center, it was clear that I would have to be there more, like all the time.
Yeah.
So we had to make a decision what we were going to do with Scheinbaum and Rustick, and it was more than one person to do it. So what we ended up doing is closing our gallery, public gallery, so I could be at the college more. And that's when we started working out of our house. So that, so that brought Scheinbaum and Russell kind of back home, but we had to move to another place, so it was a little bigger. And then I was, of course, at the college like 5 days a week, which, but I was still kind of, trying to take responsibility for the business. But a lot of those years, Janet certainly, a lot more of the work fell on Janet because I was at the college, but that was a decision we made together. And that was something, certainly she supported. We made the decision together for me to do this thing at the college as well as to keep the business. And I think it was a good decision. Certainly it was good for the first 3/4 of its life. So
yeah. Well, you and Janet have been great co-collaborators over the years, just from being partners in life to running the gallery together. And you even have photographic projects that are collaborative, and then your own solo projects. Culture, a reoccurring theme.
Sometimes I look at my work or my books and I just sometimes think, that person might be a little schizophrenic. Like, I don't know for other people if they're seemingly related. Might be that people might think they're seemingly unrelated. But the truth is, yes, I'm interested in culture, but all of my work comes from my personal life. Well, every project, if you want to go through, I could tell you how that relates. I still believe that, we do our best work through personal experience. And we don't do our best work like if we go, fly to some exotic location for 2 weeks and take pictures and come back, and then all of a sudden we have a portfolio or a body of work. I think if there's an emotional tie, if it comes from our own life, if it comes from our own family, especially, that's when I think we could do our strongest work. I think if we have add in some conflict or some anxiety or some doubt, that's all good stuff. That's all stuff that kind of keeps us honest. It keeps us on edge. It keeps us working. So, the Miami work is really about my relationship with my grandfather. My grandfather was someone who was very important to me growing up. He was a European immigrant. He was he was a butcher in New York. It's one of those, he came to America with nothing, and he was a big man, and especially as a kid in the 60s. And as much as he was kind of old world, European world, had a heavy accent, or when I started, having long hair and wearing beads and bells and boots and going through the 60s, between my parents and my grandmother, my relatives, I'd get a lot of shit for the things I was getting into and the way I was looking and the way I was dressed. My grandfather was always the voice, leave him alone, let him be. My grandfather was really an amazing, understanding soul. And I knew him as this European immigrant, always with an overcoat and a cap. And something weird happened after my grandmother died. And I'm sure a lot of New Yorkers have this story, but after my grandmother died, my grandfather moved to Florida, which is a kind of a Jewish New York thing. And he ended up moving down there, and it was safer, the weather and such. And so the first time I went to visit him in Florida, I see this man, he was like wearing, checkered pants and sunglasses, and he was wearing a white cap, and he was like this different guy. He was like a different person completely. And then unfortunately, as he aged and got ill, I met a different Florida, the Florida of the retirement community and the senior and the medical situation and the kind of the poverty within the elders down there and such. So it was really through visits to my grandfather in Florida that I actually started this work. And the first pictures I took in Florida were of my grandfather in his room. He lived in a rooming house down there, and there was a rule there that you could live there as long as you could get around under your own power. And as soon as you showed signs of illness or impairment, they would throw you out, and then you were looking at a nursing home or something, which most people did not want to go. So my grandfather kind of spent the last year or so of his life in his room. He was afraid to leave his room because he didn't want the people there to see he wasn't well. So it seemed like it was a very weird situation for him to be in at the end of his life. And as I started learning about this whole thing, which was totally new to me, of course, I took some pictures, but after he passed is when I really decided that I wanted to try to photograph the life of this retirement community. And the book is called Miami Beach Photographs of an American Dream. And very much, most of the subjects, most of the people I photographed in the 70s were immigrants, and they all came to America with this dream, and they thrived in their middle years. And then they were down there retired. Of course, some were wealthy, but many were not wealthy, and they were just living on their meager Social Security checks. And that's kind of what the pictures are about. And that's what the book is about.
Is the book still in print?
They're actually hard to find at this point. I try to buy them myself if I see them in good condition. Especially they made very few hard covers, so I like to try to buy the hard covers if I could find them. I probably have about 7.
Who published that?
The University Presses of Florida.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, they were based at the time in Gainesville. And okay, I could tie this all together. When I moved to Santa Fe in late 70s, I was working on making these prints for this book. And one of the first things I did with Beaumont, besides working with him on the, Beaumont actually helped me edit. I had about 3,000 pictures, photographs, and Beaumont actually helped me with the editing. He helped me with the selection. And then, this was still, I was getting to meet him, but then he offered to write the introduction to the book, which is something I would have been too afraid to ask him. I know I would never have asked him to do it. I would have been too embarrassed, but he offered to do it. And then he called, on the jacket, Jerry Yulesman wrote something. Jerry was at the University in Gainesville, University of Florida. So the book was being published out of there. So he actually he's the one who asked Jerry to write something for the jacket, which again, for me, this was unbelievable. And then I had a show of the work at what is now CCA here in Santa Fe. Mm-hmm. It used to be called the Armory for the Arts. And I had a show of about 60 of the prints, and Beaumont even came down and helped me lay out the show, which again, he offered. I never would have asked him. He goes, "Oh, let me come down. We'll help you. We'll sequence them together," and he did. So it was kind of amazing for me.
That is amazing.
Yeah.
Flash forward. Let's hop over to one of your Instagram pages.
Now you said hop over, so I'm guessing it's going to be hip hop. That's a good choice of words.
And I didn't even mean to do that, just kind of happened.
I know, that's the best way when it happens like that.
So as I understand it, your son was a fan of hip hop and kind of introduced you?
It would have been, this is the late 90s. It's probably like 97, 96, 97. So there was a place in Santa Fe called Harambe. And this man, whose name was Mark, he taught a hip hop class. And he came from the South Bronx, so he was very much about hip hop, and he was very much about the roots of hip hop. And so the kids started taking classes once a week, and he would teach them moves, basically. And And, I would drop Zach off, I'd pick him up. Sometimes, when you pick up your kids, you come early. So I'd hang around, I'd stay outside, I'd go in. But I watched, I'd come in and the kids would be in a circle. And I realized that Mark was not just teaching them hip hop, he was also teaching them the history, the culture of hip hop. He was teaching them about life being Black in New York and living and growing up in the streets and how hip hop started. He was talking about the roots of hip hop. He was teaching them the branches of hip hop with, not just dancing, but of course, turntablism, DJing and spoken word, graffiti. He was explaining, and he was basically giving them the full experience of hip hop, which is, as KRS-One says, it's a culture, it's a life. It's not something you do, it's something you are, to quote KRS-One. Of course, that led to the kids wanting to go to a concert. And they were, I think, 12 or 11. And the only place to go to a concert was in Albuquerque at the Sunshine Theater. So it was like, the other thing about it is that concerts in Albuquerque were primarily during the week. Everyone plays Albuquerque, but from the East Coast touring west, from the West Coast touring east, pretty much people would play Albuquerque during the week because it wasn't a place they wanted to be on a weekend because there wasn't enough population. So like for a Friday or Saturday, you want to be like in Phoenix or Dallas or Denver or Chicago. Right. So all the concerts end up being like a school night. So I ended up being the parent who agreed to take them to a concert. And I remember driving down that first time, the kids, and they're like, 12. And they're saying, oh, okay, Dad, drop us off, pick us up at 11. And I was saying, we hadn't thought any of this out at that first show. But I said, no, there's no way I'm dropping you off. I also was victim of the negative media around hip hop, the violence, the misogyny, the drugs, the language. I don't know. I had all this stuff that a lot of people still have around the genre. So I said, I'm not dropping you off. I'm coming. And they go, oh, and they, of course, no, don't come. So I promised I'd stay in the back. So that very first show, which was an amazing show, actually, I stayed in the back. And what I observed that night is what got me involved in this. First of all, I watched this crowd from the back of the Sunshine, and it was packed. I don't know if you've ever been in Sunshine Theater when it was packed, but it was packed. And the crowd basically gobbled these 4 kids up and like sucked them into the crowd and deposited them right in front of the stage. Like a wall of college kids, I'll say. I don't know, but I don't mean they all college kids, but I'll say older teenagers.
They were older than your kids.
Yeah, for sure. My kids are the youngest kids there for sure.
Yeah.
But this wall came around them like to protect them from the crowd. And I watched everyone like take care of these kids. And I knew right away I did not have to worry about anything. And then while I was sitting in the back, it amazed me how many kids came over to me and said like, well, why are those kids with you? Like you drove them down from Santa Fe? Oh, and the kids started telling me stories about their parents and you did this and is there, do I want a chair? Am I comfortable? Is there, and am I okay? And it was just amazing. The rest of that story, and I try to write about this in the hip hop book, is that, music for me growing up in the 60s, Woodstock and all, music was not just a form of entertainment. Anyone who went to Woodstock knows this for sure, but anyone who basically went to the Fillmore or any other classic place in the 60s, music was who we were. It was our lifestyle. It was how we looked. It was how we dressed. It was how we talked. It was how we got our news. It was how we got our information. It's how we formed our politics. It's how we formed our adulthood. And, you could go from New York to San Francisco and walking in the street, just seeing how someone was walking and the way they were dressed you knew it was okay to go over and talk to that person. There was this code. It was a cultural phenomena. I hadn't seen that again until I went that night to a hip hop concert where, again, there was a dress code, there was a language code, there was a secret handshake, which is still evolving. But the respect, the transcendence of race and class and age and cultural background, everyone is brought together around this art form. And I will still say to this day, no matter how hardcore a presentation, a hip hop performance is, very few, if any, artists ever leave the stage without giving a message to the kids in that crowd about taking responsibility, about voting, which is appropriate today. If you ever go to a Public Enemy show, there's always voter registration in the lobby. No one leaves the stage without giving a message, a positive message to the youth of this world, of this country. So, the rest of that story, and I know I'm probably talking too much already, is when I got home, of course, that night, the phone calls started coming from the other parents. It's like, was there bad language? I go, yes. Was there drugs? I go, yeah. Was it violent? I go, oh, maybe a little, few fights. Was it, and then it said, well, are you going to take them again? I said, yeah, I am. It's totally cool. It's totally okay. And I'm going to let Zach go, and I'm going to go. And so I started going. And then when I decided, though, I need to photograph, I realized no one in my world had a positive impression of this genre or of these artists or of this music or the whole thing. And that's what I wanted to do with my work, is I wanted to show what this is like, and I wanted to bring a positive light to what people were only getting negative from the media. And now, of course, hip hop is kind of mainstream, but when I was started, that was my goal, was to try to do something positive for this genre, for these artists, and for this movement.
I can relate in that as a kid, there was a lot of shows I wanted to go to that my dad wanted me to go to, but wasn't comfortable in me going on my own. So he would escort us to some shows as well. And then you were also asking if I had been to the Sunshine Theater, and I'll add that I was in the crowd of a number of the shows that you photographed. So I remember seeing you up there on stage with the band. And funny thing, being in school at the time, I was thinking, and it was usually a school night, like you mentioned. So I remember specifically being at this Public Enemy show and thinking, oh no, I hope David doesn't see me down here. It's a school night. And which is funny to think about now, because you were there too.
But I showed up to those 8 o'clock classes the next day.
And I did too. I did.
Okay. Yeah. Those were tough days, those next days.
Yeah. So, I mean, maybe you would have been mad if you saw me and I didn't show up for class, but
no.
I did.
I never really thought about, talk about the work as a whole thing, but one of the things about the work is it's primarily done from the stage. I wanted to shoot from the perspective of the artist. I want to try to get that energy. So for me, I was under to shoot from the stage, from the same point of view as the performer, looking at the audience. And that energy was very important to me. So I realized I always try to be discreet and stay by the wings and hide behind curtains. But I never really thought about students being in the crowd, seeing me up there and knowing that's what that's what I was doing. A few years ago, there was really a big hip hop show in Paris at the Institute. It's an Institute of Arab Art, but hip hop is also big in the Middle East. I don't know if people realize that, but it probably makes sense now that I mentioned that, because there's a lot in common, the kind of giving voice to people without voice. That's something that's very powerful aspect of hip hop culture and the music itself. I was in this show in Europe, And actually at the opening of that show, they ended up bringing a lot of us to Paris for the opening. So I ended up meeting 3 or 4 other photographers who've been photographing hip hop, actually in every case much longer than me. I didn't start until the late 90s. Most of the photographers who were photographing hip hop started in the beginnings. But I ended up meeting other photographers who were doing it, and I ended up meeting the person who is involved with there's a hip hop archive at Cornell University. So it was really through that all of my hip hop work now is at Cornell. It's preserved in their hip hop archive. So I just want to mention that they have the work of a number of other photographers, but they also have the archives of a lot of the pioneers of hip hop, and graffiti artists and break dancers. If anyone has time to Google, if you're into hip hop, you could go to the Cornell University Hip Hop Archive, and there's a lot of incredible work in that archive, but that's where all this work is housed now. And the reason I started this Instagram page for the hip hop work is basically to tie it into the hip hop. All this work is at Cornell. So that's when that happened, I started this Scheinbaum hip hop page. And I need to give a shout out to my daughter, Andra, because she actually posts a picture a day.
And so you mentioned earlier on in our conversation it being a little harder to get access in the hip hop world. Did you originally get access through the Sunshine Theater, or?
It was hard. That's
Performers?
Janet's better at telling this story because she watched me for about 2 years being as patient as hell. And I think she still can't believe how patient I was, because on one hand, it's a very communicative group of people because they communicate through their work, but they're not great at answering letters, emails, phone calls, anything. And I knew from the very beginning, before I started when I was going to start, I knew I wanted to work from the stage. So I did not only want to get permission to photograph, I needed permission to be on stage. So I did meet the people at the Sunshine Theater, and I consider them good friends and family by now. It's been a long time. It's been over 20 years or so. But, getting permission from them to photograph is one thing, but then to get permission to go on stage, there's a whole, you need permission from the artists, you need permissions from the tour managers. In some cases, you need permission from PR companies, media companies, agents. There's a whole hierarchy, and it's like everything else. People ask you, how do you get in a gallery? How do you get a book published? How do you do this? The first one's the hardest, but once you get one published, it's easy to get the second one published. Or once you have a show, it's easy to get a second show. So at that very first concert, or 2 of the people who came over to me that night were part of the Hieroglyphics crew. They're a group from Oakland. I didn't know at the time, at that first show, I did not know I was going to photograph. I did not know I was going to want to photograph. But by the time I wanted to photograph, I was able to at least call Buku One, someone who helped me a lot early on. So the people at the theater helped me. I explained what I wanted my goal was in terms of trying to put a positive light on the artist and on the genre. But having someone from the industry, so to speak, help me. They called someone and they said, could this guy come? And so by the time I wanted to photograph, it took me about 2 years till I could start, till I actually got it together where I could do what I wanted to do. But once I did 2 or 3 shows, I was able to connect with those artists. And I've always given artists full use of anything I ever did. I feel it's their work as much as mine. They've always been very generous to me, letting me share their image with me, letting me photograph. I've always given them total access to my work. So by the time we've all established it's not about money, and it's not about notoriety, and it's not about especially in the music industry, a lot of people are taken advantage of. They're always, you know, like how a lot of artists are always asked to donate prints to auctions. It's the same in the music world. It's even more. People always want, could I, you know, could I use your this? Could I use that? You know, they're always being asked for something, and they're not always being compensated. But by keeping, you know, money and finance away from my hip hop work completely, and I didn't let my work in magazines. I didn't want it to go commercial, so to speak. I always try to keep it within the realm that I was comfortable in, which is about exhibiting and publishing. But I try to stay away from doing anything which, as much as that could be conceived as commercial, I stayed away from bigger commercial things in terms. So I've always been very protective of how the work was used, where it was used, and I've always been careful about my relationships. But the people at the Sunshine and those beginning concerts I shot, they helped me get to the next one. So I could call Gift of Gab from Black Alicious if I wanted to photograph Jurassic 5, and then he would call A-Kill from Jurassic 5, and then they would say, okay, and then they would help me photograph Living Legends, because Charlie Tuna would be, you know, so everybody would help early on. And then kind of that circle got bigger and bigger. A lot of time, and it took a lot of patience.
Well, I recall a number of years after I graduated, you organized a Public Enemy concert at the College of Santa Fe.
Yeah. After about an hour and a half,
Mm-hmm.
it started raining so hard that I was getting nervous that, you know, they're going to get electrocuted. You know, it was pouring. And I went out on stage and I just like grabbed the mic and said, thanks for coming. You know, go home. It's raining or whatever. And Chuck D and Flava Flav, they refused to leave. They refused to stop. And after I tried to stop it, they played for another 40 minutes and they wouldn't stop.
I was there as well, and I remember being freezing.
It was a mess, but it was great. So that happened, you know, in the early days of Laureate, when the college became Santa Fe University, when I still was there, I taught a hip hop course. I taught a course as a freshman seminar. So I did a freshman seminar around hip hop. And that led to bringing Buku One to campus, and we did some graffiti, and it led to bring Shepard Fairey to campus, and he did the mural there. So we brought Shepard there, and then Dell was coming and he was going to perform, but he had a tragedy in his family. But I had this momentum going around hip hop, music, and culture. And then I met a former member of Public Enemy who lives here in Santa Fe, a man named Brian Hardgroove, who was the music director and bassist for Public Enemy. We met, and actually it was through my friendship with Brian that we were able, and I have to say, and at the time, this didn't stay true for many years, but at that time, the people behind Santa Fe University of our line were very generous. So between my friendship with Brian in terms of arranging for Public Enemy to come and the generosity of Laureate agreeing to pay for it, we were able to do that, which turned out to be an amazing weekend, I think, for all of you guys and myself included. So.
Well, and you were great. You invited all past students. It wasn't just current people.
And all the high school kids in town came for free. And we tried to spread that as much as we could around the community. Yeah, so, and then we bought Ozo Motley the next year. So it lasted for about 2 years where we had that relationship with the administration of the school, that we were able to do stuff like that. So that was a great time. Actually, the picture that's up right now, it was done at that College of Santa Fe show of Flavor. Yeah.
No, that was really a lot of fun. Of all of the shows that you photographed, is there one that stands out for any particular reason?
Try to keep my work to only artists who I felt were positive. meaning they're not only they themselves were positive, but their music and their message was positive.
Right.
So pretty much, and I have to admit that that definition changed not only as time went on, but also as I learned more about the music, because I don't know if I would have photographed like Snoop Dogg the first few years that I photographed, when I was saying, oh, only positive, oh, no gangster rappers, no.
Right.
But by the time I was photographing, you know, Ice-T and or Snoop or other people, they were also changing and they were evolving and they were doing more positive things in their communities. So I went to a few shows where I walked out, you know, I was on stage and I just put my cameras away and I left. I not only didn't want to photograph, I just didn't want to be there. And I didn't want to be a part of it. I didn't want to watch this. So they weren't all, you know, great. But to answer your question, I guess I'm more attracted to the artists who are politically active with a political message, or culturally active with a positive message, in terms of growing into adulthood as responsible individuals. And I guess the people who would stand out in those two genres of saying are groups like Public Enemy, like The Roots, and on the positivity growth side, you know, people, someone like KRS-One, Souls of Mischief, Dell, you know, people from the High Road Crew, Nas, even Gangstar's coming up now as you're flipping here. People that the shows that stand out are either really political or really heavy hitting with a really good message. Those are the people who I'm still listening to, even though I've kind of stopped the work. I mean, I shot pre-COVID. If somebody comes to Albuquerque who I haven't photographed, still go and shoot just to put the work in my archive. And then for some crazy reason, and you asked me earlier, is there anything I don't want to talk about? And I don't want to really talk about this. I never went to Insane Clown Posse shows. And I remember I'd sometimes be in Albuquerque and I'd see lines around the block of the Sunshine with everybody dressed as clowns, like dressed crazy. And I'm always saying like, oh man, I'm never gonna go into, I never want to be in there with those people, but with a little fascination about like what goes on here. So two of the more recent shows I've done in the last 3-4 years are, I've done 2 different times photographed the ICP, which is not the International Center of Photography. It is the International Center of Photography, but not in this context.
Not what we're talking about.
These Insane Clown Posse, there's some fascination I have with that kind of insanity, the craziness, that it's really, I can't explain it, but I will say it's a lot of fun to photograph if you stay out of the way of the Fago and stuff. But anyway, I don't want to talk about why I'm into it. I don't know why I'm into it.
Well, they have, I don't know that much about them, but they have those Juggalo conventions, I've heard.
It's a whole thing. It's the whole thing.
I remember first hearing about the 94, 95, and it kind of seemed like,
that's what I'm saying. I knew of them, and I know there's a big crowd in Albuquerque, but I didn't photograph them for the first time until like last year. Like I would never go to their shows. And then I went to a second time. So
you were just curious the first time.
I was curious the first time, and the first time my equipment got so wet from you know, they shoot soda. It's Fago. It's
right.
It's this really sugary, and it's really not good for your camera, for your equipment. So the first time I was spending more time running away from this, running away from the pictures. But the reason I went back the second time is because I understood what's going to happen. So I knew where to stand and I knew I could photograph. So the first time I didn't get a lot of pictures. So second time I did.
That's great.
Yeah.
So in 2020, you started you've started kind of 2 new, what we would call quarantine projects. One of the projects is on your website. The other one is not as of yet. And this is cameraless work.
It's everything, Liz. So, you know, I've been working what I would call seriously now. It's over 50 years. So it's a long time. And about 10 years ago, maybe longer, I kind of had in my head that someday I would like to produce a body of work the simplest way possible.
Mm-hmm.
I like to be able to shed my stuff. If you look at the abstract expressionist artists and you look at their early work, some people are surprised how incredibly well crafted it is. Like how, oh, they could draw beautifully, and how great, you know, and how good their skills. And then they went from that to this, you know. And what is that about? You know, when do you start to drop your tools and to take all of your knowledge that you've accumulated over your life's endeavor and try to get to just the essence of your medium or what you're doing? And I think this might explain minimalism, you know, it might explain Donald Judd, it might explain Jackson Pollock, and, you know, I don't know. But when you get to a place where you say, you know, I've done what I've done, but, you know, if you want to keep growing and you want to keep pushing yourself, what does that mean? And it doesn't mean, for me anyway, it doesn't mean doing more of the same. And just changing a location isn't enough at this point in my life. So, you know, I could say, okay, I did a book on Miami, and now I'm working in India, and then I did a book, you know, on Easter Island. Going to a new place isn't enough, because I'm still, in a way, I'm doing the same thing. And that accounts for my reportage / documentary-ish work. And that also accounts for my landscape work and my large format work. And it's not enough just to go to a place I've never been. It doesn't do it for me. So this imaginary place in my work is something that's been nagging me, I'll say 15 years, that I want to get to this place. And it doesn't mean like I want to give up my photography as I know it. So I've always kind of been working toward this imaginary place of working in the simplest way. And it started when I did this earlier work, and I think it's on my website. You could leave this one up there for a minute, but it's called Kalos. And I started working with my 8x10 camera again. This happened about 5 or 6 years ago. But instead of loading film into the holders, I was loading paper. So I started shooting paper negatives. So I started making unique, one-of-a-kind images. And that was incredibly satisfying. And, you know, so I'm shooting on paper, I'm developing, and I have, you know, my original intent was actually to make paper negatives and then make paper positives. But the negatives were so much more beautiful to me as objects. The negatives were glorious, as negatives are.
And so for this work, just on a technical level, for those that might not understand, you are just going back to the essence of photography, which is light and the
chemistry.
Paper
and chemistry.
Of
light
course.
And chemistry. So this work, and that's all it is. What I'm doing here, and I'm doing these ensos about a dozen different ways. You know, simply you'll notice some of them are black on white and some of them are white on black. So simply, it's not because it's a secret process, it's just because it's hard to explain, especially if someone's not familiar with the darkroom. I'm painting with chemicals. So I'm exposing photographic paper, and I'm using brushes, and I'm using developer in various formulas and various dilutions, and I'm painting on photographic paper, and then I'm processing the paper. Some cases I'm painting with fixer. In both things, I don't see what I'm doing until the paper is done, and in essence, till it's developed. So I'm doing this in the darkroom. I'm doing it in my mind. The enso is a very, very powerful form. You know, it's not only representative of the continuum of life and death, but it's also, you know, very much about the relationships of positive and negative, which are very photographic in nature. It's very much about balance. It's very much about this yin yang that many of us talk about. But what the enso itself, the process of doing an enso, which is traditionally done in a single stroke and in a single breath, it's also a visualization of your state of being at the moment you're making it. So each one in itself, I don't want to get too metaphysical about this, but each one of these is a mirror. It's a reflection of my state of mind, my state of being at the moment that I'm making them. And it started on March 12th last year. It started when this quarantine started. As I said earlier, I make one 4 or 5 times a week. I'm working on ensos, and they've evolved to doing them many different ways. And the more I learn about Japanese calligraphy, sumi painting, the more I learn about brushes. It is what it is, but for me personally, it's actually it's arriving at a place I've been working toward being for the last many years of my work, to get to a place where I could make photographs in this way. I mean, all I'm using is a brush, and I'm just doing this, and I'm processing the print. I'm working. There could not be a more simple way to make a photograph. They're just very pleasing for me to have arrived at this place. I don't know exactly where it's going, and they keep changing. They keep getting different. Sometimes like this one is kind of a burst of energy, and some of them are just a total simple black line. So,
Well, I love these. I love all of your work.
Thank you.
One of the reasons among one of many reasons I wanted to talk to you today. But I mean, really, what a perfect quarantine project. Something I've been giving a lot of thought to recently is just the importance of creativity. And I personally feel like it's that has really helped me maintain a more positive attitude through these crazy times. And I've watched a lot of other artists do the same thing. So you could be sitting around being frustrated that you can't go to shows, that you can't go to India, that you can't do X, Y, and Z. So I just love the idea that you're hanging out in the darkroom with this new exploration.
Yeah. Well, it's certainly, a lot of people around me they make fun of me because I'm so happy. This has not only is getting me through all this time, it's been joyous because of this work and this other project, which if we have time, I'll talk about it in a minute. And I'll tell you, when I was in graduate school, there was another student there. She was an expert on linguistics, and she was a psychologist on the mind. And we were talking about our thesis project, and she was telling me, this was in the beginning when they were doing biofeedback, and they would wire people up and see their biofeedback stuff. It's a whole nother thing. But she once said to me, do you know where this notion of the crazy artist came from? That all artists are crazy. And I said, well, all artists are not crazy. Like, where? She goes, what happened? She said, when they put these biofeedback, whatever those called, they hook up to your brain, and they hook them to your heart, and they hook them to your pulse. Like, when they wire people up, what she told me at this time is that when we found when people are involved in intense creativity, and when people are having psychotic breaks, the patterns are almost the same.
Wow.
And what she learns from this is, he said, what this tells us is that when people are going through hard times emotionally, that's the best time to work. Because those patterns are so close, that it's the best time. If you could take that anxious energy that you're feeling and
Mm-hmm.
change it to creative energy, it's easily transformed. Now you got to get your ass out of bed. You know, you got to kick yourself. You got to get to work, which a lot of people, like, it's the last thing they want to do when they're struggling emotionally. But if you could put yourself in a creative situation when you're having this hard time, it is a very good time to work. And I have not been struggling. Of course, I'm bummed out about what's happening, but I
Yeah.
will say that it's been a wonderful time for me to be working on this project, and especially this reflective nature of the Enso, that it actually lets me see what's inside. Like when I do, I'm surprised myself sometimes of what comes out. And when I see what's coming out, I know, oh, you know, crap, I better pay attention today. Or, wow, I'm really nice today. You know, it's, it, it basically is, it's telling me what's going on. And it's been a wonderful process for me to have in my life during this time.
That's great.
So,
I love them visually and just the whole story.
thank you. So because I've been spending, Janet and I and Andra, who were our daughter, who works with us at Scheinbaum and
Mm-hmm.
her daughter, our granddaughter Olive, is with us a lot. That our pod is basically Andra and her wife Carrie and Olive and Janet and I. So we're together a lot. So Olive is here many days. So for first month or so when I started this work, you know, she watched me, you know, after lunch, I'm going in the dark room, you know, she calls me Baba. So Baba's going in the dark room. And I think it only took about a week or so where she asked if she could come. Because we'd have lunch and I'd say, okay, and I'm going to the dark room and I'll be out in 2 hours, you know, whatever, and then we could play. But she started asking to come and she watched, and it was crazy because even after that first time, she's 4 years old. She knew she knew the developer stop path fixer. She knew the thing I put the paper on is called the easel. She knew that the button to hit on my timer. She just watched me, and she said, "Oh, that's the developer, right?" She like just totally absorbed it all. So of course, it's a little like the hip hop stuff. You know, one thing leads to another. And as I said, all my projects come from my life. So she then asked if she could make pictures too. And so I said, what do you want to do? So she wanted to start bringing some of her playthings into the darkroom. Now, I'm not making photograms in a traditional way because I am brushing chemistry. So she's actually, typically when you make a photogram, you know, you put the object on the paper and you expose it and you develop it. So probably since the end of March, she comes with me in the darkroom most days for the first 20 minutes or so. So we've been working on a project that I want to turn into kind of like a little book. So this is just one volume of these. So what we started doing now, I'll show you. So these are called Olive's photos.
Watch
And
out, world. Olive is coming.
so it started, you know, with her bringing her dinosaurs in.
Oh.
And now what we've been doing is when she comes out of the darkroom, she's been sitting with Janet, and she's been telling Janet little stories about each one, like what they are, what they're named. This is a Stegosaurus. He likes to run all over his home. He likes to jump in puddles when it rains. So she's been telling Janet these stories about each one. She tells her their names. And we probably have about 50 of these already. And they're amazing. I put down the paper. She places the objects where she wants them. I've been doing most of the touching of the chemicals, but she tells me where to brush. She says, oh, brush there, and she'll direct me. And then she'll tell me when it's ready. Like, so basically when I have to put it in the stop bath. because as we brush on the developer, I could get different densities of tone. Some of them she likes to have lighter, some of them she likes to have darker. Some of them are, let's see, some of them are got more complicated. I don't know, sometimes they're getting a little designy. The latest ones, we've been working with crystals and prisms, and we've done a few with our hands. So they're basically there's feathers. So they're getting more and more visually. They're getting more and more complex. This is just one volume. We have another volume.
Wow.
But as soon as we're done with all the stories, I think we'll do like a little blurb book or something just for the family. But that's been amazingly rewarding. And I have to say, all my students have become incredibly knowledgeable, and I'm very proud of all of them. But she's the amount of information that she has retains and knows, like, she knows what all the chemicals are. She knows what they do. She knows about the light sensitivity of silver. She knows how Fixer removes the unexposed silver particles. She just totally understands this process. And so it's thrilling. It's really a lot of fun.
That's really exciting.
And she takes a lot of ownership over the work as her work, which I'm thrilled about. So that's been my other quarantine project.
Well,
and you're the first one I've shown it to. So
thank you.
A scoop for you.
I mean, she's just around a wealth of photography knowledge every day, and
kind of is. I mean, all our kids grew up in our gallery. I mean, our older kids, they have stories about, I think that they grew up on the sides of roads. They've spent more time. Jan and I would be driving like to Ghost Ranch when we were working on the Ghost Ranch book. We would like stop the car. We'd run out with our camera. Janet shoots 4x5. I was shooting 8x10. So, we were out for a long time, and the two, Jonathan and Andrew, would end up sitting in the car. So like they have all their stories about all the time they had to sit in the car and wait for us to be done. So they have side of the road stories. Zach kind of grew up, his crib was in our gallery. Like he grew up in our gallery. That's where his playpen was. And he, Beaumont, Elliot, these were like his grandparents. Zach grew up in it. Olive is growing up like as a functioning working partner in all this. She helps us with everything. It's really awesome.
That's great.
So yeah.
Have her on the payroll in no time.
Oh no.
I won't tell her.
Yeah.
Well, this has been great, David. Before I let you go, back in the 90s, you had an amazing collection of Chuck Taylor shoes. I remember you having a different
so funny you're bringing
color
this up. Go on.
Almost every day. I haven't seen you wear them in a long time, but do you still, I guess kind of where this is coming from is I've been really interested in what various creative people collect. And that's just something I know that you, at least at one point, collected.
Yeah. Well, okay. So yes, I have over 30 pair. I have every color up until, I don't know. I was still wearing them when you graduated, right? So when did you graduate? When did you graduate?
I think 2001.
Okay, so I'm going to have to say in the early 2000s, 2020, because it's been about 10. Okay, I'm going to say by like 2006 or 7, my feet started killing me. And I wore Converse every day of my life. Really, literally.
Yeah.
I have a few pair of boots, and I'd wear boots, but since I'm in high school, I wore Converse every day. And I started having, like, my feet were killing me. I went to this one friend who's an orthopedic guy, and I said, I don't know what's going on. And he said, It's from those sneakers.
Like,
He goes,
no.
those are the worst things for your feet. And he gave me this whole thing about, you better get running shoes with a big arch, and sure enough, he was right, because I went out, I bought a pair of Asics, and after like a week, I was fine. And so I still have all my Converse, and I have a whole closet filled with them. I still have probably about 6 pairs brand new, still in boxes, that I've never even worn yet. And occasionally I'll wear a pair now, like if I want to wear a pair, like I'll wear them for a day. Like I won't wear them 2 days in a row, but I do wear them. But the reason it's kind of funny is because, thank goodness, the election turned out the way it did. And Janet and a few of her friends, they're part of this thing. Kamala Harris wears Converse.
Oh.
She wears black Converse. She's really into Converse. So there's a whole thing happening now around the nation, is that people are buying black Converse. So last week we ordered a pair for Janet of black Converse to support Kamala Harris and the new administration. And I know at least 2 of her friends who have also ordered them. And I think I hadn't been on a Converse website since the mid 2000s. It's amazing what they're making now. Like, I wish I could wear them. There's so many cool, I would buy another 30 pairs in a second. So I was just looking at the website for the first time ever. Janet's probably going to have a pair tomorrow. And I'm going to get jealous. And I'm thinking I might have to start wearing them once or twice a week again. Because I miss them so much. But I haven't thought about Converse till this election. Because I don't know if you've noticed it, but everyone's been talking about Kamala Harris's Converse.
Somehow
So
I
there it
missed
is.
that.
But I still have them. And Janet wants me, and I'll put this out there, Janet wants me to donate them to some organization to raffle to Converse of different colors. So maybe one day I'll do something, because I still have a whole closet filled with Converse. So,
well,
there you
you
go.
know, in the world of collecting, sometimes when it comes to art, sometimes we have to collect art that we don't have a spot for on the wall. And maybe when it comes to even shoes, we need to collect them even when we're not wearing them all the time. Who knows?
You better not tell me that.
Okay, I didn't say that. But that was one of my fond memories, and first showing up at the school saying, and he's got great shoes too, huh? So I had to ask about that.
Well, I'm glad you did.
Yes.
So it brings us full circle. So.
Exactly. Well, it's been super fun, David. Really appreciate it. And really appreciate anybody who is listening. If you've enjoyed this conversation, this is still a new channel. Please like, comment, subscribe, tell your friends, keep the conversation going.
It's been a pleasure talking with you. It's really been nice to talk with you. I'm really proud of everything you're doing.
Oh, well, thank you, David.
You're welcome.
I've kept the love of photography going, and in this show, we're exploring all different types of art forms. So this
Keep
is
it up.
Something I might not have probably started if it wasn't for the pandemic, but it's been keeping me motivated and excited, and it's kind of my intention to share that with everybody else as well. So
keep it up. Good.
Thanks, David. Well, enjoy the rest of your day.
You too.
And hopefully I'll see you sooner than later.
Hope so. Take care.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.